Welcome to a new episode from Perfect English Podcast. Today we're going to talk about much. And there is a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. And let's start about this versatile word that we can use in different contexts with different meanings. First, let's start with very much. You use very much to say that something is true to a great extent. For example, we say, I enjoyed it very much, or I doubt it very much. Now, when very much is used with a transitive verb, it usually goes after the object. You do not use it immediately after the verb. You do not say, for example, I enjoyed very much the party. You say, I enjoyed the party very much. When very much is used with an intransitive verb followed by a that clause or a to infinitive, you can put very much either in front of the verb or after it. For example, you can say, she very much wants to come, or she wants very much to come. Other examples, we very much hope he'll continue to be able to represent you. I hope very much you will be coming on Saturday. We'd very much like to give you a present. And he would like very much to write to Dennis himself. But pay attention. In positive sentences, you do not use much without very. You do not say, for example, I enjoyed it much, or we'd much like to give you a present. That is wrong. You have to use very with it or not at all. In negative sentences, though, you can use much without very. You can say, for example, I didn't like him much. Or the situation isn't likely to change much. You can also use much in negative sentences and questions to mean often. For example, she doesn't talk about them much, and much here means often. Or, does he come here much? And that has the same meaning like, does he often come here? And again, pay attention, you do not use much in positive sentences to mean often. You do not say, for example, he comes here much. So that was about very much, which is used a lot, and we use it almost every time we speak English. But now let's see how much is used with adjectives. Much and very much are used in front of comparatives, but are not usually used in front of other adjectives. However, you can use them in front of ed words. Let's take a look at some examples. Education is a much debated subject. She was very much attached to her husband. So you see here we used much with ed adjectives, debated and attached. And you can use very much in front of afraid, alike, alive, and awake. For example, I am very much afraid that she will end by marrying her cousin. Or, Dolly and Molly were very much alike. The animal was not dead but very much alive. Or, the children were very much awake. So we can use very much with afraid, alike, alive, and awake. And now let's see how we can use much with comparatives. You can use much or very much in front of comparative adjectives and adverbs. For example, if you want to emphasize the difference in size between two things, you can say that one thing is much bigger or very much bigger than the other. Let's see some other examples. She was much older than me. And remember, we're exaggerating here. Now I feel much more confident. The new machine was very much bigger and very much more complicated. Or we can say, this could all be done very much more quickly. Now we can use much more or very much more in front of a noun to emphasize the difference between two quantities or amounts. For example, we can say, she ought to have been allowed much more time. Or, children whose bones are growing need much more calcium than adults. Or, we get very much more value for money. Now, much is sometimes used in front of superlative adjectives. For example, I thought he was much the best speaker. But I will have to tell you that this is not a very common use of much, but it can be used in this context with superlatives. Now you can use very much in front of adverbials where you can't use very on its own. For example, she does things very much her own way. We cannot say she does things very her own way, but we can say very much her own way. Or we can say battle damage and fatigue left the eventual outcome of the fighting very much in doubt. We cannot say very in doubt, but we can say very much in doubt. A very much is sometimes used in front of noun groups. You use it to emphasize that someone or something has all the qualities you would expect a particular kind of person or thing to have. For example, he was very much a seaman, or he was very much a man of the people. We can also use much with to, with a double O. You use much to in front of an adjective to say that something cannot be done or achieved because someone or something has too much of a quality. For example, I knew where it was, but was much too polite to say. Or, the rooms were much too cold for comfort. Or we can say the price is much too high. Note that in sentences like these, you put much in front of to, not after it. You do not say, for example, the rooms were too much cold for comfort. You say were much too cold for comfort. If there is very much more of something than is necessary or desirable, you can even say there is much too much of it, which may sound a little bit strange, but it is used, much too much. For example, eating much too much salt can be dangerous during pregnancy. However, if there is a very much larger number of people or things than is necessary or desirable, you do not usually say that there are much too many of them. You say there are far too many. So remember, you don't say much too many, you say far too many if you want to use it in the same context. For example, every middle-class child gets far too many toys. Now, that's not all about much. You can use much as a determiner. You use much in front of an uncount noun when you are talking about a large quantity or amount of something. Much is usually used like this in negative sentences, in questions, or after to, so, or as. Now we look at the following examples to see how it is used in this context. Is this going to make much difference? I gave the president too much power. Or, there is so much financial hardship. Or we can say, it absorbs as much heat as possible. And now, when we want to use much in front of it, this, or that, we use much of, not much. For example, we say, I still remember much of it in some detail. Or much of this could be glossed over. You also use much of in front of a noun group which begins with a determiner or a possessive. For example, much of the recent trouble has come from outside. Or Caroline devoted much of her life to education. And much can also be used as a pronoun. You can use much as a pronoun to refer to a large quantity or amount of something. For example, we say there wasn't much to do. Or much has been gained from our discussions, and we are using here much as a pronoun. Now note that you do not usually use much as an object pronoun in positive sentences. Instead, you use a lot. For example, instead of saying he knows much about butterflies, you say he knows a lot about butterflies. We say, for example, I think he knows a lot about protection. Or I suppose they learned a lot by doing it. And finally, how much? You use how much when you are asking about the price of something. You can say, for example, I like that dress. How much is it? And one last thing before I forget, you do not use much or much of to talk about a large number of people or things. Instead, you use many or many of because these are countable. And much is used with uncountable. So that was all about much. I know it is too much. Maybe you know some of the things I talked about. Maybe some of the things are quite new. Maybe you see some of the things are too much to learn. But at least you will leave this episode with something new you learn about much. This is your host Danny saying thank you very much for listening to this episode from Perfect English Podcast. I will see you tomorrow in a new episode.